This next speaker, you think you're going to learn something about the Constitution from, because she is the most sought-after national speaker on the Constitution, who averages over, to get this, 200, do the math on this. Oh, I told you that the highest level math would be the 2 lines, 2 tables for lunch. I was wrong. It's 250 events in nearly 22 states every year. That's a lot of traveling for 5 years straight. Is it 6 years now? 6.5 years straight now. But get this, she also has a degree in biochemistry from Blackburn College and her Juris Doctor from the University of Florida College of Law. She served in the U.S. Army as a military intelligence cryptologic linguist, and was a prosecutor for the state of Florida for nearly a decade. Krisanne also worked with a prominent national First Amendment law firm where she traveled the country defending Americans whose rights were being violated by unlawful arrests and prosecutions. She's written 6 books, is that correct? 6 books on American history and the U.S. Constitution, and is now a professor at River University School of Government. Krisanne is a regular consultant on the Constitution for numerous radio, podcast, and television programs. She's been seen on I-24 News, Law and Crime, Newsmax, Fox News, and she's been interviewed by C-SPAN in depth, and her books and classes have been featured on C-SPAN Book TV. Krisanne has had a nationally popular radio show for more than 6 years. It's carried both on terrestrial and internet stations. And Krisanne lives in Tampa, Florida with her husband, J.C. Hall, who also is a military veteran, right? And their adopted son, Colton. She can be found at krisannehall.com. Actually, she can be found right here, but your information is on krisannehall.com. Please help me give a warm CSPOA welcome to Krisanne Hall.
Thank you, everybody. I'm very excited to be here. We literally just landed at Houston Hobby, got a car over here, and here we are now, excited to be back here with you all. Excited to give the presentation today to help us understand where we are. I'm going to let him do his magic here and set this all up for us before we get started. While I'm waiting, I'll just give a little story. Sheriff Mack probably doesn't know this, but we have a friend in common. I don't know if they're friends still, but I've had a friend for about 10 years. He's a U.S. Army veteran, 11 Bravo, Hua guy, and we were sitting down talking just yesterday, and I told him where I was coming. He says, "You will not believe this. I actually met Sheriff Richard Mack, but not probably the same way you did." He said, "You see, before I was a conservative, before I was involved in the movement, as it were," he said, "I was an environmentalist activist." And I forget where he tells me he was, but he was actually on a mountain protesting. And Sheriff Mack and his deputies came up to escort them off. Well, one of the young ladies that was with my friend Zach had fallen on the way up and sprained her ankle really badly, could not walk down. He said he thought they were going to get tased, they were going to get, roughed up and dragged down the hill, yet Sheriff Mack picked up this young lady and carried her on his back the entire way down the mountain. Now, I don't know if you remember that story, Sheriff, but I'll let you know you made an indelible impression on that young liberal man who is now a champion and a warrior for liberty in the Constitution. You see, it's relationships that make the difference. It's not always what we say, how we say it. It's more importantly establishing relationships with people. You see, we have have a unique position in America that we are not a democracy. One guy clapping, thank you. We are a constitutional republic. And there is a big difference. I've even heard these people who are confused sort of equivocate and say, it's a democratic republic. Do you know that there's just as many syllables in democratic than constitutional? Why wouldn't you just say the word that it actually is? It doesn't cost you any more to say constitutional. And it describes who we are and what we are and how we're supposed to operate. We are not a democratic republic where everything is created by mob rule, although it would be hard to tell with the way media operates today. We are a constitutional republic where laws are created through equal representation, and government is limited and defined by the Constitution. That's why both those words are very important. This disinformation about us being a democracy or a democratic republic is very, very dangerous seed to sow. Because it is only in democracies, or maybe more frequently in democracies, where slavery is birthed. Whenever you have majority rule over the minority, you have the perfect storm for slavery. That's why we're a constitutional republic where minority groups can have a society-changing voice through equal representation in the law. And that is who we are. And that's what makes us exceptional. That's what gives us a future. You see, I don't know, maybe I'm just a girl that's everything is the glass is half full, but America is not lost. Nothing has been destroyed. We've just forgotten who we are. We don't need to rewrite the Constitution. We don't need to amend the Constitution. We need to learn the Constitution. But you see, we operate under more than one constitution. Everybody in here, no matter where you live in the United States, there are two constitutions. You have the Constitution of the United States, and you have the Constitution of your state. And that's really, really important. Is there a problem? Okay, I'll keep going then. You see, as sheriffs, you take an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of your state. What's interesting is you can do both of them at the same time. That's how it's supposed to work. I realize that the federal supremacist message that has trickled down to our educational systems and infiltrated the American psyche since 1833 teaches that the federal government is supreme. Only that's not true. Now we're not on the screen anymore. So our duty to the Constitution of the United States is the same duty to the Constitution of your state. Samuel Adams said this: "No people will tamely surrender their liberties nor be easily subdued when knowledge is diffused and virtue is preserved." He said, but on the contrary, when the people become universally ignorant and debauched in their manners, they will sink underneath their own weight without the aid of foreign invaders. Can we just admit by a raise of the hand that we have lost more liberty in the last year at our own hand than we have lost by foreign powers in decades? There's only one reason for that. We have been deliberately denied discouraged, and defeated in our attempts, in our efforts, and in our desire to study and learn our constitutions. But you see, as a sheriff, you have a promise that you made. Inherent in that promise is knowing who you are. You're not just some guy or some gal. You're not a law enforcement officer. You have a higher calling than that. And the same is how Samuel Adams would say that we have slipped underneath the weight of our ignorance. Our sheriffs have lost their calling because we have failed to teach who our sheriffs are, where they came from. The office of a sheriff has an amazing history. A history that proves how important the American sheriff really is. You see, I wouldn't be here today if I thought it was all lost. To be honest, I'd be on a sailboat somewhere waiting for it to be over. But you see, I know there is a pathway forward of restoration. There's a pathway forward to liberty. Our founders laid that for us. Patrick Henry said, "I have but one lamp by which my feet are guided, and that is the lamp of experience. I know no way to judge the future but by the past." Alexander Hamilton had said, "Experience is the oracle of truth, and where its responses are unequivocal, they ought to be held to be sacred and conclusive." Einstein said it a different way. If you do the same thing over and over again, expecting different results, that is the very definition of insanity. Yeah. We look a little insane these days, running down the well-trod path of socialism and not even recognizing the road signs. But you see the key. And I don't want to put like a whole lot of pressure on you. But the key to turning this all back the way it's supposed to be is you. So Sheriff Mack and I also share a unique honor. We are both on the Southern Poverty Law Center's list of anti-government extremist hate groups. Yep. I've been on there now 7 years. For the first 5 years, I was the only individual named on their list out of 996 groups, which actually broke their policy. Because their policy is we won't target individuals. So apparently, SPLC thinks I'm a group. I don't know if that should be an insult, or I need to go on a diet, or... But the last 2 years, they did something else to me that I thought was kind of interesting. They actually invented a group for me. And now I'm on the list twice. But you see, I just want to set the record clear. I am not anti-government. I am anti-lawless government. And when those we've entrusted with the power to govern, who have taken that oath that says, "I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States," not only failed to do so, but set their sights to deliberately circumvent and destroy. I'm not the criminal. They are. Because you see, this Constitution is called the supreme law of the land. If you violate the law, what are you called? Just saying. So I want to teach you guys, how about we go on a journey together, a little historical journey about who the sheriff is and where you come from, because it's beautiful. It's a transformation. If I can be a little girly for you for a moment, I don't want to trigger anybody with that kind of identification, but I do identify as a woman, so it's okay. It's a caterpillar to butterfly story. You see, the office of the sheriff originates under the reign of King Alfred the Great, in a very different way than the sheriff is today. Now, England was divided into counties called shires. And then over the shires were these people called reeves. And the shire reeve was appointed by the crown to be an agent of the crown to enforce and do the bidding of the crown. These shire reeves. So if you say shire reeve really fast with an English accent, you can figure out where sheriff comes from, right? So the sheriff, the shire reeve, under Alfred the Great, was the highest authority in the shire, second only to the king himself. Now, you have several transformations in the kingdom itself that I want to show you. Most significantly, in 1014, you have a complete transformation of how the kingdom is supposed to work. From Alfred the Great to Ethelred the Unready, the kingdoms were your stereotypical kingdom. You know, ultimate power from the king. I say, you do, or else. But under the reign of Ethelred of the Unready, the people took charge. They actually chose Ethelred to be their king and said to Ethelred, we'll make a deal with you. We'll allow you to be our king on one condition. Your only job will be to help organize our shires for their common defense, and you will negotiate with other kings for our peace, trade, war. But you, Ethelred, will leave us alone to govern ourselves in our shires. The king had no domestic jurisdiction within the shires. Now, if we'd been teaching the Constitution properly for the last 170 years, everybody'd be like, oh yeah, well that makes sense. Because that's the exact same arrangement that our states made when they created the Constitution that created the federal government. How many of you heard of a guy named James Madison? Yeah? Anybody know James Madison's nickname in history? Father of the Constitution. He wrote a document that we call Federalist 45, in which he says the powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. Those that remain in the state governments are numerous and indefinite. He says the powers delegated to the federal government by the Constitution are to be exercised principally on external affairs. And then he names them: war, peace, negotiation, foreign commerce, not domestic. He says every other power that include the ordinary course of affairs, the lives, the liberties, the properties of the people, the internal order, improvement, and prosperity of the state are reserved to the states. When we created the federal government, we created the federal government under the lessons that we learned from our forefathers' history, that there must be a separation of powers between a federal government and a local government. And the power in the states must be greater than the power in the federal government. So now we have transformed into what we call a limited monarchy, because the king is limited in his power by the consent of the people. Now we're going to go through some history here. You get Edward the Confessor. Edward the Confessor is a very generous king. By the way, just little review. Does the king have the authority to be generous under the Ethelred Agreement? No, because he doesn't have domestic authority. But you see how quickly we have now expanded the central government's power based on one single principle of human nature. People like free stuff. And when the king is handing out free stuff, the people don't ask where it came from, who they had to take it from to give it to you, or what it's going to cost them later. And every time you get a free thing from the government, you expand the power of the government. Now, we're going to move through this quickly because our history lesson isn't about kings today. I do teach a history lesson on the history of the Constitution where we go through this and we learn some very, very important lessons. But we have to know that we have a progression happening here. We started off with a limited monarchy, but we're slowly but surely expanding the power. King after king after king after king. Now, Henry is the brother of William II, who are the sons of William I. Now, William I is a terrible, tyrannical king who wants to fundamentally transform the kingdom. He does so by corrupting the court system, replacing the judges in the court system with men who are not loyal to their law, but loyal to the command of the king. Enforcing foreign law on the people, taking control of the churches by removing the leadership in the church with men who are not loyal to the word of God, but loyal to the script of the king. His son, William II, carries on this magical transformation, which is really beginning to tick off the people. So one day, William II and his little brother Henry go hunting together. Anybody know the end of that story? Dick Cheney, maybe. Was that my out loud voice? William II is killed in a mysterious hunting accident, coincidentally making Henry king. Now, the people are not happy with William II, but they also realize that if Henry will murder his own brother to be king, then what will the lives of the people be worth to him? Nothing. Now, if you want to stay king, you have to keep the people happy. Because if you don't like your king, let me ask you, if you don't like your king, do you start a recall petition? Do you find a new king to run against him in the next kingly election? That's right. If you don't like your king, you got to raise up a rebellion and chop off his head. Now, Henry wants to keep his throne and his head at the same time, so he knows he has to do some things to appease the people. And the most important thing he's going to do is make a promise called the 1100 Charter of Liberties. Henry's promise is that government will never be evil and oppressive again. Yeah, right. But I want you to see all these principles that Henry laid down in his promise. Separation of church and state. By the way, just a little, as one of my professors used to say, a little bonus for your educational dollar. Separation of church and state, as Henry wrote it, is the separation of church and state as it's supposed to be. Not the way we think about it today. You see, separation of church and state means that the government has no business influencing your church or dictating or making rules for your church. What's interesting is this king from 1100 who had no CNN, no MSNBC, no Fox News, knew that if the government was influencing and manipulating and coercing your church, that you have an evil and oppressive government. You see, it's only been since our most recent bout of education into ignorance that the American people have accepted a very radical error. That separation of church and state means that you can't talk about God in public and you can't talk about faith in politics. That is a lie. And probably a good part of the reason why we're in the fix we're in today. So we have this promise, in writing, by the way, which declares 14 things the government's not allowed to do. And that if the government engages in these activities, the people will be on notice. They have an evil and oppressive government, and they'll be righteously justified to resist that government. Through this transition, however, we go back to our shire reeves. Now, the shire reeve's office, remember, is held at the king's pleasure. But the shire reeves were drawn from the ranks of the barons, the royal administration, and even the local gentry. Now, if you don't know what that means, the local gentry was the step between the serf and the barons. So they were pulled between two worlds. Most of our sheriffs came from the local gentry. And what happened was, the office of the shire reeve was often a violent power struggle to maintain power and control. I mean, almost like little kings within the shires. The same kind of conspiracies to kill the king, the same kind of conspiracies to war, the same kind of power grabs within the shires through the shire reeves. The shire reeves could be vicious and tyrannical. Now, I want to introduce you to the next king. His name is John. And John is a massive taxation king. If you talk to the bishops of that day, he was the most evil king they'll ever know. You see, if you couldn't afford to pay your taxes in John's kingdom, which was likely, he was going to mutilate you. He was cutting off hands, feet, ears, cutting the tongues out of people who could not afford to pay their taxes, even executing them. One bishop said that even hell will be fouled by the presence of John. You guys know John, by the way. You probably don't realize it. Have you ever seen this movie? Disney's version of Robin Hood. John is the king in the Robin Hood legends. But even in this Disney rendition of history, you see that the sheriff is an agent of fear and tyranny, because that's what he was hired to do, to enforce the law. Well, John tries to take control of the church, which brings a great battle and a great revolution against John. And in that battle, in that revolution, the victory of the people bring to us the true American sheriff. Because you see, it's through the Magna Carta, the product of that battle, the demand of the people, that the king not only be subject to the law, but the king be held accountable when he violates the rights of the people. And now we're going to put it all in writing and change the world. It happens in Clause 61. It begins. Now, just to give you a little history, the Magna Carta is written in the first person because the king is signing it as a promise. So when it says, if we are chief justice or our officials, it's as if the king was standing up and giving a speech. If we, our chief justice, our officials, or any servants offend in any aspect against any man, or transgress any articles of peace or of this security, and the offense is made known to 4 of the said 25 barons, they shall come to us and declare immediate redress. Now, what's interesting is, in the list of commands against the king is where we get many of our own principles, even in verbatim, our own Bill of Rights. Clause 52 of the Magna Carta, to any man whom we've deprived or dispossessed of lands, castles, liberties, or rights, without the lawful judgment of his equals. You see, we didn't invent a right to a trial. We will at once restore these. In cases of dispute, the matter shall be resolved by the clause for securing peace, clause 61. Now, we only saw the first part. We're not done with that. But I want to show you the root of history that provides us with a foundation of self-evident truths, that our liberties are inherent within us, not the creations or the gifts of those in power or governments or documents. The bottom line is this: we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their president with certain inalienable rights. I was just making sure you're still paying attention. Their governor, their judge, endowed by their Creator with certain, because we're certain, inalienable rights. They're ours. And that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just power from the consent of the governed. Our Constitution is our written consent. If government operates anything, any power, any edict, any executive order, any regulation that is not consistent with the Constitution, they are operating outside our consent and exercising unjust power. Clause 38. In future, no official shall place a man on trial upon his own unsupported statement without producing credible witnesses to the truth of it. Your right to remain silent, the right to produce witnesses for your defense, the 5th and 6th Amendment. Clause 39, you have the 4th, 6th, and 7th Amendments. Clause 40, you have the speedy trial in the 6th Amendment. Clause 45, you have a requirement for people in office to keep their oath. Clause 55, the 8th Amendment, all referring back to Clause 61, the way we secure redress. Now, a very important part of our First Amendment comes from Clause 61 of the Magna Carta. I'm going to do what I have been doing for 11 years now. I'm going to give you a pop quiz. You cannot look up on your phone the answers. No looking through your pocket Constitution. I'm not a lecturer. I like when we get into these kinds of group teachings, but this time I don't want you to say anything. Don't shout out the answer. Don't even lip sync the answer, because I don't want your neighbor cheating off Mike Peruka. Got it? There are 5 liberties in the First Amendment. To yourself, not out loud, name all 5. Because here's the problem. You took a promise to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. This should be a no-brainer. But I know, teaching 11 years now, all over the country, since I've been asking this question, there have been national polls asking this question, I have found them to be true. That less than 2% of the American people can name all 5. You see, if you don't know what your rights are, how do you know they're not already gone? How are you going to defend something you cannot define? And if you have taken a promise to support and defend the Constitution, how do you keep that promise if you don't even know what you've promised to do? See, that's why Sheriff Mack does this. That's why everybody's involved in this. That's why this is so important, because you are vital to the securing of the liberty of the people. But we fail when you don't know what you don't know. We have sunk underneath our own weight of ignorance. Clause 61 of the Magna Carta. If we make no redress within 40 days, the 25 barons who may distrain and assail us in every way possible, with the support of the whole community of the land, by seizing our castles, lands, possessions, or anything else saving only our own person and those of the Queen and our children, until they have secured such redress as they have determined upon. The last liberty of our First Amendment, the right of the people to petition the government for a redress of grievances. We did not invent it. We inherited it. And here, listen to the words of the King. I recognize that these rights are yours, that if we trample upon your rights and we do not make you whole, that's what redress means, by the way, to be made whole. If we do not make you whole within 40 days, you have my permission, the King, to assail and disdain upon us with whatever force is necessary, saving only us, until you are made whole. Now that's a power you have to use if you have a king. We don't have kings. We have a constitutional republic. Our means of redress, quite honestly, are more powerful because they're peaceful. But we have a duty not only to ask to be made whole, but demand it. But even greater than that duty, to demand to be made whole, is a duty to prevent the violation from ever happening. And that happens because we now have a sheriff and not a shire reeve. You see, Clause 61 of the Magna Carta finishes and says, any man who so desires may take an oath to obey the commands of the 25 barons for the achievement of these ends. What are these ends? The restoring of the rights of the people. Sheriff, I can't see that far away.
3.
Dude, really? I was told 40 minutes.
You get the other half later.
All right, here we go, quickly. This is where you are. This is who you are, right? The duty of the sheriff: to defend the Constitution, state and federal, to defend the rights of the people against all who would deny them, criminal, citizens, or government. Now, I realize we have sheriffs from all over, but I picked the Texas oath of office because I want you to see. The oath is a promise to the people to defend the constitutions first. Everything else is second. Now, what's interesting is you don't have to run to the U.S. Bill of Rights to fix your problems. Your state constitutions have their own Declaration of Rights that mirror everything within the U.S. Bill of Rights, that reinforces that not only is the U.S. government limited and defined, but so is your state government. So yes, the 10th Amendment reserves power to the states that is not delegated to the federal government. But your state constitution creates a limited and defined state government that cannot, without violating itself, operate outside the Constitution. We must realize and know our state constitutions. We have a whole class on that. Let me show you this before we end up here. This is Alexander Hamilton explaining to us what happens when Congress breaks the law, violates your consent. He says, no legislative act, therefore, contrary to the Constitution, can be valid. Here we have James Wilson. The power of the Constitution predominates, and anything, therefore, that shall be enacted by Congress, contrary thereto, will not have the force of law. Here you have the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. Yeah, you can boo him, but he knows the truth, and he tells you right here in NFIB v. Sebelius. In the typical case, we look to the states to defend their powers by adopting the simple expedient of not yielding to federal blandishments. You are commanded by the Constitution, federal and state, you are commanded by those who understand the separation of powers to refuse to enforce laws that are not constitutional. That is your duty to your oath. You will find people that will say, well, I'm just a sheriff, I'm just an officer, it's not my job to determine what's constitutional or not. That's why we have the judicial system, and if I do that, that's a violation of separation of powers, and I didn't go to law school, so I'm just gonna do what I'm told. Guess what? You took an oath to support and defend the Constitution. It's your job to know the difference. The last thing I want to tell you, because I would be negligent if I didn't give you the defense of your actions. This is Ross Goldstein's statement. Justice Department attorney says that the federal laws, I grabbed the wrong quote. Sorry about that, guys. What he said was, since the beginning of the Constitution, our Constitution has been interpreted to say that federal laws supersede state law. They are superior. That's what they're going to say. However, he's referring to the Supremacy Clause, which does not say that. The Supremacy Clause says the Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, are the supreme law of the land. If your laws, executive orders, regulations are not made in pursuance to the Constitution, consistent with the Constitution, then they are null and void. And that's what Article 6, Clause 2 says. You are not bound by them, because it is the Constitution that is supreme, not the laws that are created. And these people in your communities are taking a stand. They're depending on you to stand with them and for them. The Supreme Court said in 1934, the Constitution was adopted in a period of grave emergency. Its grants of power to the federal government and its limitations of power to the states were determined in light of emergency, and they are not altered by emergency. Why does all this matter? That's why. Because when we tamely surrender to a lawless attack upon our rights and our liberties, we encourage that attack, and we involve others in our doom. It's a serious consideration, Samuel Adams said, that should weigh heavy upon our hearts, that ages and millions yet unborn will be the miserable sharers of our experience. We don't uphold the Constitution so we are comfortable today. We uphold the Constitution and refuse to enforce unconstitutional decrees so our children can live free tomorrow. Thank you, and God bless.
Thank you, Krisanne.